Let's start with something every beauty professional has experienced. A guest sits in your chair, you've built a great relationship with them. They laugh with you, they trust you, they've been coming to you for months, sometimes even years. You recommend something would truly help them. Maybe it's a treatment or a product or a service upgrade that would completely change their results, even save them time.
Mhm.
And what do they say? Oh, I'll think about it. Or maybe next time. Or the classic, that sounds amazing, but not today. And you walk away thinking, maybe they just weren't interested. But here's something most beauty professionals don't realize. Most of the time, your guest does trust you. They may even want the result you described. So the real question here becomes, why don't they say yes? And the answer might surprise you, because the issue usually isn't trust, it's clarity.
Yeah, makes me think of like I feel like inside the beauty industry, Lindsay, we tend to like jump to conclusions when this happens. Like
Mhm.
we assume things like, well, they must not have the money, or they must not really care about their hair or their skin, or they must not think it's worth it, right? But the reality is much more interesting than that. Most guests don't say yes, not because they don't trust you, but because they don't fully understand the problem yet. And that distinction, that truly changes everything because trust alone does not create action. Understanding creates action. That's a writer down for sure. Understanding creates action. Think about that for a moment. Like someone can trust you deeply and still not move forward because people rarely buy solutions until they fully understand the problem.
Yeah, think about what happens when you visit a great doctor. For example, you walk in and explain what you're experiencing. Maybe you say, my shoulder has been hurting. You know, now imagine this. Imagine your doctor immediately says, okay, great, you should get surgery. You probably pause, right? Not because you don't trust them, but because you don't yet understand, what's causing the pain? How serious is it? What will happen if you ignore it? Why that solution matters. But when a great doctor walks you through the diagnosis, everything changes. They explain what's happening, they show you the root cause, they help you understand the long term consequences. And suddenly the treatment makes sense. You don't feel sold, you feel helped. That same thing happens inside salons every single day. When guests don't say yes, it's often because we skipped the most important step, which is diagnosis.
So let's picture something for a moment. Like, let's say a guest goes home that evening after they've been to your salon, they walk in the bathroom, they look in the mirror, and the same frustration is staring back at her. Her hair still feels flat. I can relate to that myself, right?
Mhm.
Her skin still feels inflamed, and her lashes still don't look like the way she hoped for them to. And it's not because you didn't care, your team didn't care. It's not because you weren't talented or your team wasn't talented, but because the real problem never became clear. And when the problem isn't clear, the solution always feels optional.
Yeah. Let's talk about the word decision. That's what comes up for me. Decision comes from the root word meaning to cut away all other options. So when someone makes a decision, they eliminate all uncertainty. But here's the challenge: guests can't eliminate uncertainty until they have clarity. And clarity doesn't come from recommendations, clarity comes from diagnosis. In fact, every confident purchase follows the exact same pattern. The pattern goes problem, diagnosis, solution. So without diagnosis, your recommendation, it just feels like an opinion. But with diagnosis, your recommendation feels like guidance. And that difference is where transformation begins.
Mm. There are actually like three silent questions that every guest is asking themselves. They may never say them out loud, but they truly are thinking them. And so, question one is this really my problem? See, you see, guests often describe symptoms, not causes. So they'll say things such as flat hair, dry skin, breakage, acne. But what they may not understand the root issue yet. And so, question two is this the right solution? But without understanding the why, any recommendation feels optional. And then, question three is it worth it? And here's the interesting part: value only becomes clear after the problem becomes clear. When those three questions remain unanswered, guests start to hesitate, not because they don't trust you, but because they're still uncertain. Right. I will never forget, I sometimes was watching one of our beauty pros out on the floor. And when she would finish a guest, maybe you've had experiences or seen this as a salon owner, she would say, "Oh, do you like it? Do you want to go shorter next time? Do you want to go lighter next time? Feel this side. Do you think that feels okay? Let me turn you around and show you the back. What do you think?" And I was like,
Mm,
"Oh wow, we have a really huge opportunity here because like
mm,
we're not making we're actually creating more problems for the guests, right?" I said, "Just try this next time." I said, once you are showing them the completed look, just say, "Feel your hair. How does it feel?" And then talk about that big problem that they talked about. Maybe their hair is flat. Do you feel like you have more volume now that we got rid of some of that flatness? And what are you most excited about moving forward? And so she actually did that, and changed that language. And I saw her in the back room later on. And she's like, "Jen, I actually feel high." She said that was so empowering. And it was like she had the biggest smile on her face, and because it
mhm.
truly like the she understood if you could truly take the problem for the guest, and that's all you got to do to close the guest experience, is make sure that you really secure that problem. They have the solution to it. Like, man, it's so powerful. You're not even causing more confusion for them. So she was so excited about that. So that's just a great example of how all that comes into play.
Ah, that's incredible, Jen. You're just your local drug dealer getting
I was like, wow, that's good.
you're like, wow, that's really good. But that's so true,
Mhm.
like it does give you that euphoric feeling, and
Mhm.
this is where the best beauty pros in the industry do something different. They slow down. Instead of rushing to recommend, they lean into curiosity. Just like you mentioned, asking better questions, they ask better questions.
Mhm.
Questions like, what have you tried before? What do you wish was different about your hair or skin? This is on the front side where we're asking these questions. On the back side that Jen was just talking about, she named off some great questions. But on that front side, like, what frustrates you most right now? If we could solve one thing today, what would it be? I love, if we could wave a magic wand and change anything about your hair, what would it be? And the guest starts talking and something powerful happens. They begin to see the problem more clearly themselves. And when someone discovers the problem themselves, the solution suddenly feels so obvious.
This is so interesting. This beauty pro too had just served a guest. I'm thinking of all these stories today. They're just popcorning in my head because of
Mhm.
how powerful it is when we truly are able to discover these diagnoses and discover these problems. Is She had a new guest come in, and we do a as a welcome gift 20% off any new products. And the beauty pro did just fine. She set the guest up with a product. She sent her to our hospitality desk to finish the experience. Our hospitality host said, "Hey, just because you are a new guest, we want to make sure that we welcome you with 20% off any home hair care so that you can make sure you recreate your look at home." The guest goes over and starts exploring the retail area, and I just happened to be there looking at some promo displays, and I just noticed she's shopping around and looking. And so I said, "Hey, what is what is most important to you today? What are you looking for? How can I support you?" And anyway, we had this really great conversation. And I started asking a lot of questions. just like Lindsay was given those questions before, what do you wish was different about your hair? Like, what frustrates you most right
Mhm.
now? And by the end of it, she had bought 4 products. So we went from the one recommendation to 4
Mm.
products, and this is no props to me either. It's just showing you guys the power of, like, when we truly get focused on asking those questions, what can really come from that. And I know because she was so inspired by the experience she had in the chair, and then by that aftercare experience, that she made her next reservation for sure. So, you take a client who's shopping around uncertain to a client by asking those questions who purchases 4 products and comes back. To me, that's what it's all about.
Transformation and certainty. I think that's
Yes.
amazing. I love that. And if you want to test this tomorrow inside your salon, just try something simple. Instead of jumping straight to a recommendation, teach your team to ask one extra question. So after the service or before the service, we recommend it before, but you could even do it after if it's brand new. Just say this: Can I show you what I'm noticing? And then explain what you see. For example, you might say something like, I'm noticing your ends are breaking because they're dehydrated. You could ask them, have you noticed that too? Or
Mhm.
I'm noticing your skin barrier looks a little compromised. Have you noticed that too? Suddenly the conversation shifts. It's no longer a product pitch, it's diagnosis, and diagnosis creates clarity.
Yeah, and this is truly where a powerful identity shift begins. Service providers, they perform tasks, but beauty pros, they guide transformation. Lindsay, you were just telling me about something that you
Yeah.
saw.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I
tell us
know
about it.
exactly what you're talking about. Because we've just been talking about, well, earlier we were talking about our external world and our internal world privately in another conversation. And we started talking about, I saw a quote, as somebody who won a top 200 salon winner. And the quote said something like, our new service enhancement menu allows a guest, when booking a service online, app, or web, to receive a variety of service enhancement recommendations that are curated for each service. Prior to this feature, the guest may have stopped at just booking the haircut. And it was like, wow, like no wonder. I mean, they got recognized for growth, but it was like 12% growth. Like, imagine if the guest wasn't just choosing that from a menu that they saw online. Imagine, like you just mentioned, Jen, service providers perform tasks. So they were like waiting around for these bookings to come through, and this salon owner was giving credit to this booking software
Mhm.
and not to their team, because beauty pros, like you mentioned, Jen, guide transformation. They're the ones who
Mhm.
can see the problem and recommend that solution.
That's such a good story. It just reminds me that service providers, they wait for request, right?
Mhm.
But beauty pros, they truly uncover the needs. And so service providers, they hope the guests say yes. The beauty pros create that clarity. So saying yes feels natural. And the difference between those identities isn't talent, it's actually communication.
Yeah, and this is also where salon owners step into a different role, truly, because a service provider owner hopes their team figures this out. They're like, oh, this is great. I hope they figure it out. But a salon owner teaches it intentionally. They build systems, they train communication, they show their team how to move from being an order taker to a trusted advisor or a beauty pro. And when that happens, everything inside the salon changes.
And you guys, this is why these conversations matter so much in our industry because the future of beauty isn't just about technical skill. It's truly about leadership and professionals to know how to diagnose, how to guide, how to educate, and help guests make confident decisions. And when beauty pros learn how to do that, like guests get better results, professionals earn more, and salons grow stronger. And because of that, the entire industry elevates.
Yeah. So if you ever find yourself wondering why a guest didn't say yes, even though they trust you, Don't assume the answer is price. Don't assume the answer is interest in the products. And definitely don't assume the answer is you. Most of the time, the real issue is clarity because people rarely move forward the moment they hear a recommendation, but they often move forward the moment they truly understand the problem. And that's where the role of a beauty pro becomes powerful. Not convincing, not pushing, but guiding somebody from confusion to clarity. And that's when saying yes becomes easy.